Will the precinct chairman take a count and give me the number? Wait till I get a pencil now. Thank you. Oh, that's why. Precinct 1.
17.
Precinct 1 is 17. Precinct 2. Precinct 2 is 19. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 15. Precinct 4. Precinct 4 is 19. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 10. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 18. Precinct 7. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 14. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 10. There are 122 town meeting members present. That's the same exact number as we opened the other night, and that is at 7:50 p.m. Will you please rise and join me in saluting the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
If Lawrence Sawyer,
Sour.
if you're here, I have your ID badge.
Just a few quick notes. I'm going to remind everyone involved, especially the people who are responsible for preparing articles and motions on articles. Let's get that clear. For town meeting that have to be distributed. This table here is the table for that. Now, I'm doing this for a very deliberate legal purpose. One is this table in this room is reserved and under the direction of the moderator. What is out there is public information in the sense that I can't say what or wasn't or shouldn't be on that table. However, this is official things, motions, material that has to be given to you. It is voted on. It is supposed to be divided by precincts. I'm going to enumerate what I received the other day and what it should have been up here or has been up here. On Monday, there were the Finance Committee changes in the budget, items of 210, 610, 1 and 122, plus Article 23. That was in a packet. Article 23 was on a separate piece of paper. It's the one that has big memorandum on it. Then the FinCom also had a copy of Article 52, a motion for Article 52, which is for the deferred maintenance program. This is an alternate motion that will be put on the floor. The other is what was in the report. Many of these kind of things are where the technical changes that were required by some other official purpose. Article 15, the compensation plan was available, compensation and wage plan, whatever it is. That was on the table for distribution with the details that were in the article, that were supposed to be in the warrant, but there was no motion with it. The motion is up here on the table as Article 15. And it says motion for Article 15. When we come to that, we'll handle it accordingly. This evening, the school department has provided a small piece of paper, which I just misplaced. When we come up to the school department budget, this is be presented. There are some legal questions that have to be answered before that. The motion for Article 15. Article 33, the full text of the floodplain map bylaw. There's a short synopsis. Several pages on that. However, the maps that were requested, the building commissioner was away and ill over the weekend, so the maps are still being prepared, but I had advised him to have this bylaw. This will be what we'll actually be voting on. We'll explain later why that's not what's in your warrant. And we have another piece. It is it says alternate motions to be presented for Articles 49 and Article 50. These will be brought on the floor instead of what was there because there were some changes in what was required in the by the statutes. So as much as you try to get everything, and precinct chairman, if you, some of those packets are very thick. It was also distributed in a legal size sheet of 6 or 7 pages called FinCom Article Funding Sources. I believe this was, I have no source from that. I believe it's from the Board of Selectmen. However, that's, oh, it is from the Finance Committee. Okay. Those were the things that are up here. If there's some other material that should have been up here, it's not official. All right, now I will just give a quick summary of what's important from last session. There was some motions made for some reserve time. On May 22nd was a request to vote work on Article 33 to follow Article 23 if the Article 23 comes up. The other was on June 12th as a date for presentations. There's an awful lot of noise going on over there. On June 12th, the date has been requested for a presentation on Article 60. Tabled Article 2 reports until after Article 80. We voted Articles 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, the enterprise fund budgets, Articles 8 and 9 during the revolving fund, and budget Article 10, the departments 1 through 29. We will begin this evening on Article 10, Department 30, Police Department. Now, in our procedural motions, there was, and this is a reminder, if there's going to be any reconsideration of anything in the budget, it has to be done before we come to the final motion where we tally up, and I flashed a picture on the screen. At this time, Mr. Hill, do you want to make a presentation, or do you want to Mr. Crimmins? As it regards to the information I just dispensed?
Not the information you have just dispensed, but unless I missed it Monday night, usually Mr. Rowe gives us an indication of what the available free cash is. I don't know that we got that information. Do we have that available?
Mr. Moderator, Bill Rowe, Town Accountant.
Yeah.
Based upon the unaudited balance sheet submitted, I hereby certify that the amount of available funds or free cash as of July 1, 2012 for the Town of Stoughton is, or are, General Fund, $3,277,260, $3,277,260. Water Enterprise Fund, $818,902, $818,902. Sewer Enterprise Fund, $906,101, $906,101. The Public Health Enterprise Fund, $2,219,144. $2,219,144. The Cedar Hill Enterprise Fund, $50,718, $50,718. And the Ambulance Enterprise Fund, $50,330, $50,330. The certification is in accordance with the provisions of GL Chapter 5923 as amended. Sincerely, Gerard D. Perry, Director of Accounts.
Could I ask through you, Mr. Moderator, have other than the general fund balance, the general fund balance is not a total of those
No, the general fund is the actual free cash. The other ones they sometimes refer to as retained earnings.
Okay, so that's my question. Those retained earnings figures do not reflect the enterprise funds as approved Monday night, correct? For instance, the public health no longer has $2,219,144 in its.
Correct. Yeah, this would be the gross. This would be the gross number before subtracting any motions already approved.
If I may, Mr. Moderator, is it possible to get the figures now based on how the enterprise accounts were approved on Monday? Would they be as listed in the book?
They are listed in the book, yes. We haven't finished with Article 10 yet, but the retained earnings used are in the book.
Okay, so for instance, again, just by way of example, as I'm looking at public health, that shows 0. That is their current reserve, 0. Just to make sure I'm following correctly. I think it's on page 6 or 7, I believe. It's on page 7.
Right, so we used $388,743 for Article 5. So the remaining balance would be the $2,219,144 minus the $388,743.
I'm sorry, Bill, where would I see that?
In the Article 5, were you looking at Article 5? On page 24?
No, I wasn't on that page, I'm sorry. Right, so we took 388,743 from retained earnings, correct? For
Correct.
that? So would I simply subtract that amount from the 2 million figure that you gave to give the current balance?
Correct, yeah. So it'd
Okay.
be 1,830,401.
Okay, okay. And if I may, Mr. Moderator, is it possible to get the current balance in the stabilization fund?
Just take a couple minutes, Mr. Moderator. So the current stabilization balance currently is $4,650,233.66.
And that's,
That includes the 2013 appropriation. $4,650,233.66.
and finally, that's prior to any action by this town meeting, is that correct?
Correct, right.
Great, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Hill.
So, Mr. Moderator, I think we can get through Article 10, and then we can do that presentation on debt, if that
Okay,
works for you.
fine, that's fine. We begin Department 30, account number 210, Police Department.
So if you take out that little packet of information that we distributed on Monday night that has the cover memo on it with the adjustment to 3 departments that had settled contracts or were employees not in collective bargaining, which is Article 23. The police budget, Department 210, with a settled contract and all of the adjustments made to that contract, the new bottom line total is $5,333,026. I'm sorry, $926.
5339.
533,926, as it is in the memo.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 533,926.
Mrs. Colburn, you want to speak? As a member of the Finance Committee.
Pat Colvin, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. I just want to take a few moments, I'll be brief, to just explain the process that we went through in terms of the collective bargaining. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because the police budget is the first one we've come to that actually has a settled contract with figures in it. So let me just briefly explain what we've done. First of all, I want to make sure that you all understand what you're voting on. I thought there would have been a presentation at the beginning of the meeting, but there wasn't. Normally, what we've done in the past is we've had articles up front that, for example, I think it was Article 19 would have been the Superior Officers Union contract. We would have given a dollar amount recommended for that article, and that's how you would have approved funding for that contract. This year, that's not being done anymore. The management, the HR director, the town manager, and the selectmen chose a different path. What they did is they put the raises in the line items of the budget. So if you vote the budget for the police as recommended by FinCom, you are approving the Superior Officers Union contract funding. Let me say that again because it's a real departure. If you vote the Finance Committee recommended bottom line for the police, you are approving funding for the Superior Officers Union contract because that's the contract that was settled for police. So that's just a big change. Everybody has to wrap their head around. I know I struggle with that. The process was that the selectmen in management originally added salaries increases into just about every salary line item throughout the whole budget. That was really problematic for the FinCom because it was very difficult for us to do our due diligence as we normally do. We go in and we verify every number that's given to us. Each one of our subcommittees works their little tails off, making sure that we can bring you the most accurate numbers we have. And I know, the chief, the fire chief, the police chief that I've worked with, I ask for a lot of information so I can verify their numbers, and that's what we've been used to getting in the past. The problem we had is if we left the line item raises in every budget for departments where contracts had not been settled. So let's just pick one out of the air. Let's say SPAEA. Let's say the SPAEA contract was not settled, and we left the raises for all those SPAEA employees in every single budget. What you're basically doing is by approving those department budgets, you're approving funding for contracts that don't exist yet. You would be giving up town meetings' right and responsibility to approve funding for contracts. The Finance Committee had a problem with that. It is our job to approve recommendation for funding of contracts, and I'll say that again. It is not the Finance Committee's role, nor is it the town meeting's role to approve contracts. What we approve is the funding of those contracts. By putting the line items in the salaries like they were, and not having them as a separate article, town meeting wouldn't be specifically saying, I'm approving that contract. It would be implicit in the fact that you approved the budget. So what we did is we took this arduous task of peeling out the raises from each of the budgets by union. That way, if one union settled and one union didn't settle, we would have numbers that we could present to you. The unions that settled were the Superior Officers in the library. The others did not settle. We were told repeatedly by the selectmen, by the HR director, and by the town manager that May 7th was the drop-dead date for union negotiations. I understand that then slid up to May 20th, but we were told point blank, any union that did not settle by that date, 2014 was off the table. There would be no more negotiations with those unions, period. So what the Finance Committee did is we scrambled. Even though we don't like to scramble because we want to give you the most accurate numbers we can, we met last Thursday right before organizational town meeting. And we said, okay, with police superior officers settled and libraries settled, we'll put money back into those departments. But we won't put it back in for the unions that weren't settled again because we were told that negotiation's over, done, drop dead. It was really difficult. That was a tough meeting for us because we did not get the financial analysis that the Finance Committee has asked for. Even though the contracts were settled on, I believe, signed on April 8th, the Finance Committee didn't get them until about 2 weeks ago. We were told at every turn, no, you can't have those contracts. No, you can't have the financial analysis. The numbers that we voted were pretty much estimates because we were not given a single Excel spreadsheet that said, this is the cost of that contract. But we really wanted to do our best by the employees of the town of Stoughton. So even though there was division and there was aggravation, we voted to put money back into police and library, even though we weren't given the information we've asked for since January. So the budget you have before you now that Mr. Hill sent out that says memorandum on it has monies put back in for the superior officers. So if you vote... Pardon me?
And Deputy Chief.
And Deputy Chief, thank you. That was a little cause for concern for me, just because the Deputy Chief is not in the Superior Officers Union. Yet that money was put back in that line item, even though he's not in that union. That made no sense to me, but it was still approved, because nobody wanted to deny anybody their raises. But it should not have come to this. We should have gotten the information we've asked for since January. So we did. We voted Thursday night, we put money back in. So what does that mean to you? That means if you approve the Finance Committee budget as amended in that memo, you're approving a change to the Deputy Chief line item, you're approving a change to stipends, and you're approving a change to the Sergeant Lieutenant items. It is still so frustrating to me that we have to do this. If you look at the spreadsheet that's attached to that memorandum, if you look at the police budget line item details you're given, you're going to see two adjustments, which makes me crazy. You're going to see a salary adjustment, and you're going to see a stipend adjustment. The reason you see those as adjustments is because we were not given the detail at the line item level that we required to go in and make the correct changes to this budget. But again, we did not want to deny people their raises, so we went with adjustments to stipends and adjustments to salary. Though that's going to be a mess next year, because next year when you go to look at your prior year's figures, guess what? They're not accurate because they've been adjusted. So that's basically where we stand now. We've asked repeatedly for information. We've been denied at every turn. We still came to the table, and we still did everything that we could do to get the money for the contracts that have been approved into the budgets. The reason we moved the rest of the money out of the Selectmen's Reserve again is because we were told point blank, May 7th, drop dead date. Whoever does not sign cannot have $2014, move the money out. We did what we were asked to do. Thank you.
Do we have any further comments from the Finance Committee? Mr. Hill?
I would just add that the numbers that we put back in the budget we received last Thursday. I did receive the line item detail for Article 23 the next day, specifically the step and grade increases by the positions that were affected, but no current salary, adjusted salary, et cetera. So we waited till last Thursday. We opened up the police and library budgets and the selectmen's budgets. We allocated those monies according to what had been put into the contracts, the whole numbers that we were given, and then again, as is our practice, we wouldn't leave money in the budgets if there were no signed contracts. So in the past, you'll have seen that there are years that there are no monies in there because there were no agreements signed that year. So we would never leave anything in the Selectmen's Reserve if it was, something that was unsigned for at this point. So.
Mr. Anzavino, as chairman of the board, did you wish to speak on this? Mr. Anastas, did you wish to speak? That's what we are on.
We're on the police budget.
I'm mesmerizing.
So he's going to criticize.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As some of you may know, there was a meeting that preceded this meeting. And I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what's before us. But what's important to understand is that we currently have contracts with 7 unions. Those contracts expire on June 30. The board is in negotiations with the 5 unresolved contracts. In order to negotiate in good faith, it's important to be able to have funding. It is my opinion that not having a selectman reserve creates a problem if we are to proceed with negotiations with those the 5 remaining unions. I will, with respect to this particular budget, it seems to me it's pretty straightforward. There isn't any money for wage increases that are collectively bargained for patrolmen. I certainly would like to see that be put back in. I certainly would like to see us be put in a position to resume those negotiations. And I would encourage you to listen to Deputy Chief Devine and others. And I would hope that we don't vote, or you don't vote, for the FinCom budget. You vote for a different motion that includes some latitude so that we can collectively bargain, knowing that money is available. I don't have a problem personally with putting money in a line item that says salary and allow the Board of Selectmen to do what we're supposed to do, which is to negotiate in good faith, knowing that there's funding available. As of right now, that funding doesn't exist the way that this is currently construed. I'd like to see us at some point address that. And I thank you for your time.
Mr. Hill, on the comments from the selectmen.
Rick Hill, Precinct 2. That's the first time I've ever heard that. The first time. Hundreds of hours went into this budget. We asked for those contracts, and we asked for the monies to fund them, and then we were told to zero out the Selectmen's Reserve because there were no further contracts being negotiated. I'm happy to figure out a solution here. As a matter of fact, we have a solution. But I just don't want the impression left that the Finance Committee went willy-nilly on this thing and shut down all these negotiations. We don't have any control over that. We come to town meeting, we don't have signed contracts, we don't fund them. What are we funding? There's no contract to fund. There's a whole change in position for the negotiations this year, and I applaud the work of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager and the HR director to try and get their arms around a process that has been a slippery slope at best in the past, and to get some consistency across the process and across all of our collective bargaining units so it's much fairer for the town and for all of our employees. That's what's important here. So if there's a need to put money back into a Selectmen's Reserve, we know what we took out. We can make an adjustment number when we get to the end of the budget because we've already voted that. But this is the first time that we're hearing this information from the Board of Selectmen. And I just want people to be aware of that. It's a little exciting. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy, you want to present your comments?
Yes, sir. I got a lot of good news for you. But it's an honor for me to be here before you tonight. I just left my boss and he'll tell you in his own words, he was elected to the executive board of the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Development Association. It's a very large honor for us. It brings in a tremendous amount of resources to the town that we didn't have available. Will be a beta test site going forward for a lot of different things in law enforcement, but I'll get to that. The chief gave me this letter for all of you. Dear Honorable Board of Selectmen, Mr. Town Manager, Finance Committee, and Town Meeting representatives, I want to thank you for your unwavering support of the police department over the last several years. I am pleased to announce that I was elected to the executive board of FBI Lead as the third vice president. This is an incredible honor and brings worldwide attention to the town of Stoughton. In simple terms, the Stoughton PD is considered by our peers to be one of the most progressive and elite mid-sized agencies in the world, and you have a lot to be proud of. In 3 short years, we've delivered on all of my initial goals, those being the achievement of accreditation. We've the most current and comprehensive policies and procedures that assure excellence in delivery of police services. We have 9 superior officers with FBI Leadership Trilogy Awards and expect that next year all superior officers will have this honor, and it would make us the only department in the world to accomplish that feat. The improving of the department through professional development and individual improvement, our success depends on developing our human capital to their fullest. My supervisors have taken their learning and put it to work. They understand that leadership requires us to swim upstream, and we have to be at our best. Our leadership corps is reflective of the town in that They have eagerly adapted to change. They've created a culture of survivors and not victims. We empower others to make suggestions and speak their mind. We encourage experimentation. We embrace mistakes as learning opportunities. We look for opportunities to brainstorm new answers to old problems. We set short-term goals. We don't set unrealistic expectations that can't be met. It was especially exciting and rewarding when just last week, the best-selling author of It's Your Ship, Lessons on Leadership from the Best Damn Ship in the Navy, Captain Michael Abershaw, flew up to Stoughton PD on his own after hearing about the success of our department and how we incorporated some of his techniques. My philosophy echoes Dwight Eisenhower when he said, fostering an environment of meaningful input into the organization is critical to their success. It is imperative to provide quality leadership that empowers officers to problem solve, develop competence, and unlock potential. In addition to all of this, we've been able to provide quality service to you, our customers. Our officer-initiated activity is up, our crime clearance rates are up, and there has been a culture of accountability throughout. The tools you have given us have been put to good use. It is for that reason that I'm humbly asking for your support of our budget. Respectfully, Chief Paul Shastany. And for myself, I would like to acknowledge the hardworking officers of our department, and they made all this possible. The Chief and I understand that it has been the talent, intelligence, and hard work of the men and women of the Stoughton Police Department that has made this a reality, and has made May 2013 a banner month for us as a department and as a town as a whole. For any of you that don't know, we completed a command staff reorganization with the promotions of 5 new supervisors. We attained our aforementioned accreditation on May 2nd. We raised over $3,000 for the victims of the marathon bombings through the efforts of Officer Sullivan. And yesterday, the Chief was elected to be part of an organization that has been the crux of our turnaround and will make us a testing site for every new advancement in law enforcement. I can't express to you how proud I am to be a Stoughton police officer and to serve all of you, and I thank you for that. In regards to what's been brought up here, I will say Ms. Colburn's been very good working with us. I think we've provided her everything she's asked for. I do know this. The last contract that my officers had was expired for 4 years. And I do know that we don't want to go that route again. The Superior Officer's contract that was settled was probably the first police contract that I've seen settled since I've been here within its 3-year term. And I think that's the goal of the board. I think it's a noble one. And I hope that you will allow them to complete that task as well. And I thank you.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dick Fitzgerald, Precinct 3. We had as a previous speaker had stated, there was a meeting downstairs that we had, and there was some information brought out at that meeting. And through you, Mr. Moderator, or if you can answer, I think you made a statement earlier in your opening statements. If there were to be any adjustments to this budget, we can make them at the end of the budget? Or do we have to wait until the end of town meeting to bring it back for reconsideration?
Are you asking the moderator?
I am.
My advice is if you want to make an adjustment with what is before you, this is the time to do it.
Right now?
Well, if you've got a definite number to do definite things.
Well, through you, Mr. Moderator, let me direct a question to the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. You presented a budget, Mr. Chairman. Did your budget include line items for salaries for the unions?
Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker, the budget presented by the Board of Selectmen, as previously indicated, had salary increases and other benefits within the budget. But I'm going to go one step further, and I want to make this perfectly clear. This is not something that happened overnight. We have been in this process, I believe, since the very beginning of February. the management team that was sent in to negotiate was given specific direction on what the board was attempting to accomplish. That letter was given out last week. I briefly spoke about it Monday, and we did have an open meeting to speak to any town meeting reps that wanted to have questions answered to that. And I will stand by the board's direction that we took, and it's my opinion that the management team has met those directions with where we are today. We are trying to avoid, as the previous speaker mentioned, going years on end and then finally settling a contract 2 or 3 years down the road. We don't really think that's a way to have any financial control, stability, or projections of costs by constantly doing that. And I'll state that this was the consensus of the board, the approach that was taken to try and settle contracts for this fiscal year, in this fiscal year. And I'll give my personal opinion that I think it's foolish to constantly go 2 years past a fiscal year and then try and backfeed all of the contracts 2 years after the fact. You people are here to vote a budget for FY14. You should know what that's going to cost you. And that's what the board wants to bring to you. And in my opinion, what you have before you is the direction the board took. Now, I would have liked to have seen every union settle. That would have been ideal. I've been on this board for 5 years, and I've been constantly amazed at the way this has gone. All right? I personally am satisfied with where we are, with the exception that I would have loved to have had the other 5 unions settle the contracts as the superior officers in the library did.
Does that answer your question?
No. My question was, and I'll direct it again.
I answered
No.
your question that
No,
the
you didn't.
line item from the selectmen's
know-
budget that was proposed had the salary adjustments and other benefits figured into the line items. That's the first thing I said.
Really? So let me ask you the question. The selectmen's budget for the Stoughton Police Department is $5,418,743. Does that include any salary increases for contracts for other than the superior officers assigned? Does that include the patrolmen?
Every budget
Yes.
in this
Does
book,
it include the patrolmen?
for the third time, through
Does
you,
it?
Mr. Moderator, for the third time, the selectmen's budget recommended
A yes or no?
in salary line items raises. Period.
That
The
includes-
answer is yes.
That
That's the fifth
includes,
time.
that includes the patrolmen.
Yes.
Thank you.
I believe in the policeman's budget, the patrolmen are listed, so if all the line items for salaries
understand that
included
fully.
raises.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. The reason I bring this forward after this is that in the meeting, what's happened is that negotiations will end. We heard tonight from previous speakers of May 7th, May 20th. What's happened right now is that the money that used to be, I served for 6 years over there, and there was always a line item for reserve for collective bargaining. Okay? Now, that was always there, and the reason it was there is that during the year, the unions negotiate with the town and settle their contracts. There has to be money to pay once the contract is settled. There's no money there now. You're not going to get the town's attorneys to sit down and negotiate because there's nothing to pay them with. You're not going to get the union's attorneys to sit down and negotiate because there's nothing there to pay. So, if the selectmen, as we just heard, in their budget, have installed line items for these negotiated salaries, then I would move that I would make a recommendation, I'd move, correct me, Mr. Moderator, that this body approve the selectmen's budget for the Stoughton Police Department of $5,418,743. Can I explain why?
Yes?
All right. Just to clarify a little further, if we can go back at the end of the budgets, at the end of the budget discussion, and install to the other unions that are out there the selectmen's line item to that budget, to be able to cover when we get into negotiations, I would think that we would be saving the town some valuable legal costs. Because if we don't have the money to negotiate, it's unfair labor. And stop me if it's wrong. The unions work for the town. Negotiations have always been going on. Previous speakers said that they don't want to see it go out 2 years. They don't want to see retroactive. Of course you're going to. It's got to be there. What? You didn't have a contract? So you didn't have a contract in the year 2013, so we'll settle in 2014, but we're not paying you for 2013. I'm really not sure how that would be welcomed by labor. To further make one statement, and it'll be the last one, ladies and gentlemen, if this stands as it is, and this isn't approved, the negotiation for the contracts, and I'll stand corrected if somebody wants to answer this for me, the negotiation for contracts for the town employees cannot begin until July 1st, 2014. You can't do anything before that. There's no money. So you'll start at July 1st, 2014. The unions can get together, and they can start negotiating with the town. So we're out there another year further. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. I'd love to be corrected on this. Tell me it won't be that.
Mr. Moderator, just a point of information. It's my understanding from our management team that the unions have been told that once we get through town meeting, the management team is ready to go again and sit at the table. We're not going to wait till July 1st, 2014, but the team has already indicated they will be available when town meeting is over to go back and keep negotiating.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the previous speaker. We do that, they negotiate the contract, they settle. I was told downstairs that there's no more memorandums of agreement. So they would settle, and you have to have a signed contract. How are we going to sign a contract if we can't fund the contract? We have no money.
Mr. Moderator, without getting into too much detail,
Please get into the detail.
This is a very simple thing. You can negotiate a contract, and it can be negotiated going forward. The only problem with this fiscal year is the offer might have to be 0. That's the problem that, Mr. Moderator, that's the problem that seems to be really at the crux of things here. But negotiations are not going to stop. Negotiations are going to be resumed. And all I can tell you is it's not in my understanding that they have been told they are over. They have been told distinctly that when town meeting is over, they will be back at the table.
Well,
now,
if the unions have been told that...
That's the question you asked. That's the answer.
If the unions have been told that, then somewhere, ladies and gentlemen, between the end of that table and the end of this table, these people know where the money is. So when the contracts get settled, I guess they have the money someplace, and we wouldn't have to come back to special town meeting?
Yeah.
How are you going to fund it? Where are you going to spend the money from?
Through you, Mr. Moderator. I cannot tell you what the contract would be now, because it hasn't been negotiated. No salaries have been negotiated, just to
We
correct the
understand that.
statement that was made earlier.
We understand
The
that.
money that was put in there was money that would accommodate certain raises, but they were not negotiated raises, otherwise the contracts would have been signed. We certainly have every right to go back to the table. We certainly have the right to continue negotiations, and there are avenues to take that some people may not agree with, but that's been the position of the board.
I'd
Now-
like to see the money in the budget. That way there, we don't have to come back. If the contracts are negotiated, they're there. If the money's in the budget, we don't have to come back and do anything. It's there to be spent.
That is correct. If the money is in the budget, it is there to be spent. I'll use your words exactly.
Correct.
If the money is in the budget, it is there to be spent, period. It's there to
It's
be
on
spent.
any article.
No, it's there to be spent.
How are you going to fund it?
How am I going to fund what?
How are we going to fund the contracts? Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thanks for your help.
Mr. Hill.
I would argue that we have $76 million to fund a contract with at this point, if there's one that's negotiated between now and next year. Just a point of orientation for everybody. Use the mic?
Yeah.
In years past, raises had been put into the budgets, the operating budgets. 5 or 6 years ago, the Finance Committee, in doing its due diligence, figured out that there was all this extra money in the budgets. Town meeting would approve them, and the money would get spent with no contracts. Employees didn't get any raises. The money got spent on other things. So every year, for years, the town was spending way more money than was supposed to have been spent in that department because they had this extra money built into the salary line. They can spend to the department total. That means they can overspend one line, underspend another. So the Finance Committee lifted those monies out and created that collective bargaining, reserve for collective bargaining line in the selectmen's budget, and put the money there so that if we did have signed contracts, we'd be able to fund them. In years past, so last year, there's probably $800,000 in that line because we had 3 years of contracts to catch up on. And the prior year was probably zero because there are no contracts. So you need to understand the process and the history of what happened here. If there's money that was in that selectmen's reserve, we took it out because we were flatly told that we were done negotiating for this year. And that's the direction that we took. So you just need to understand the history, or I'd like you to understand the history about why that money was there and where it went and why it went. So right now, the policeman's budget's funded, the library's funded, and the Article 23, so the employees not in collective bargaining are also funded. So we want to make sure the people that had contracts or the people that don't have to have contracts get their raises. That was the goal, and that's what we accomplished. So we have options going forward, but I hope that answers the questions. Thanks.
Mr. Gator. Now remember, now we're using, the number that we're using is the selectmen's number, which is 5418743.
Dennis Gator, Precinct 3. I understand that, Mr. Moderator. I'm not going to reiterate what Mr. Fitzgerald said. He hit most of the points that I would have said. However, I do question what's going on here. There's some sort of contest going on between the Finance Committee and the Selectmen, and it looks like the Police Department's caught in the middle of it.
They're funded.
It doesn't look to me, in my simple mind, that it is, Rick. I'm sorry. The Selectmen's budget seems to have the funding, and your budget does not seem to, and I'll just leave it at that. If
You don't
can
have a
make it-
contract
if
for
you can
police
make-
or patrolmen, so why would we put it in there?
Pardon me?
You don't have a contract for patrolmen. Why would we put it in the police budget?
But if you, I'm not going to go back and forth with you, what Mr. Fitzgerald just said, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mrs. Anzavino.
Barbara Anzavino, Precinct 4. I just want to say that the town meeting has a role in this whole process, and your role is to approve the funding of the contract. If you vote for the police budget the way the selectmen put it, you are approving a contract that hasn't even been written yet, nor do you have any details. You don't know what the percentage was that they got. You don't know if stipends went up. You don't know if vacations went up. You don't have any idea what that contract would be, yet you voted for it. Yet you approved it by putting that money in. That is the only way that that's town meeting's role. If they negotiate a contract that you don't like, you don't vote on the contract, you vote on the funding. And so if you vote the selectmen's budget, you're approving a contract that hasn't even been negotiated yet. If you do what we're suggesting, or at least what we're thinking about doing, is putting that money back into that line item, then you, the selectmen's reserve, then you will have the right to approve that contract when you go to fund it. In the olden days, there were articles. If you look in your book, these were the articles we always got. And it was these articles where the funding was attached. They decided to not put the money here, but to put the money in the budgets. And that way you kind of lost your role here. They're trying to get away from having town meeting approve the funding for the budgets. So if you vote for that selectmen's budget, the way that it is written, you're approving a contract that you haven't seen. That's all I'm going to say.
Mrs. Camacho.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I agree with the previous members of the Finance Committee and in what they've been speaking about. I am a member of the Finance Committee. If we were to approve the Selectmen's budget, we're approving a particular amount, but we don't know if the patrolmen or the other unions involved will settle for that amount. And it's my understanding, and I would like, Mr. Moderator, your permission through you to the Town Council to ask a question relative to 150E and the ability of the police and the fire to say, we don't care to collectively bargain with you any longer, and we will go directly to Boston to arbitration. Is there an exception for police and fire to do that so that our contracts do not really end up being collectively bargained in this town? And they are the only units that are able to do that. That is my question through you, Mr. Moderator, to the Town Council.
Town Council.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm not aware that there is a separate treatment for police and fire versus other collective bargaining contracts, which are all fall under Chapter 150E. I guess I would just add that that statute does provide that town meeting is supposed to, if a contract's agreed to, town meeting is supposed to vote on whether to fund the first year or not. If it does vote to fund the first year, then the contract is done. If they do not, then the parties have to go back and negotiate again. So the two budgets, I'm sorry, the two contracts which have been approved, and now you've been provided with the numbers to approve those cost increases. Those are properly before the meeting. Other ones which do not have those in there, if a contract ends up being agreed to later this year, in my opinion, the special town meeting would have to deal with them and vote on funding them and whether that's, and come up with a source for those funds. If there's not a reserve fund, then they could be appropriated, transferred from some other source.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Therefore, I would suggest that we do not fund, because as the town council has indicated, if we fund the first year, we're funding the contract, that's it. And whether you get enough funding in the negotiations, then you don't know if you're going to have enough funding in the selectmen's budget. So what the Finance Committee did this year, I think, was a very, very wise thing to do, and they were told to do that. I do have another question, though, about the police budget, Mr. Moderator, if you'd let me ask that question.
You may.
Last year, the police budget contained the ability to hire 5 new police officers, but yet we funded 7 new recruits, which went 2 officers over what was voted at the town meeting. So in other words, it went over the appropriation.
That was due to expected retirements, ma'am.
I haven't finished my statement. It doesn't make any difference to me if there were expected retirements, and the number 5 doesn't make any difference to me. What makes a difference to me is that 2 people were hired, were sent to the academy, had to be paid, an additional 2 people, before those retirements took place. That caused the policeman's budget to go above the appropriation that the town meeting voted. Therefore, to me, it's spending in advance of an appropriation. It's spending for which there was no appropriation. It doesn't make any difference to me whether there were 2 in, and then later on in June or July, there were going to be 2 retirements. If we allow that practice to continue, then any department head in this town could say, all right, I need 3 more employees this year, and maybe I'm going to have 2 retire, or maybe I'm not going to have any retire. Since when are department heads able to simply hire employees outside of what was voted at the town meeting at their own discretion, and then come to the Finance Committee for a transfer to fund that? And that is exactly what happened in this case. I think you need to look very, very closely at these budgets. Funding only what has been negotiated is the proper and appropriate thing to do. You don't stick your neck out and fund what you don't know is going to happen in a contract negotiation. Let those contracts be negotiated, and if we have to come back here, so be it. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Clip?
Karen Clip, Precinct 6, I think. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the Human Resource Director, please.
Mr. Kelly?
Sir, by doing this with the police and your negotiations, are you planning to maneuver that or you ask the employees of the town to vote for one union and opt out of their, so you have only one collective bargaining unit? I've seen this done in other agencies.
No, we're negotiating with the remaining 5. We've finished bargaining with 2.
Is part of your master plan to have the employees vote for to join one union and one union only? Because other agencies have done this, and it's called union busting.
First of all, I wouldn't violate the law. Second of all, I cannot, because we're in negotiations, discuss specific strategies in public. However, as the previous speaker asked, there is a provision of the police and fire unions being able to go to the Joint Labor Management Committee in Boston for
and request mediation and arbitration. Arbitration would then come, the funding of that award would then come before this body.
So there's no future plans to try and just dwindle it down to one union in this town?
As I said,
Okay. No,
publicly I can't discuss strategy, but we've negotiated with two separately and come to conclusion.
No, I've seen other agencies in the federal government do this, and we all should be really, really careful. You union people, stand up for yourselves, please.
Well, as I said, we've negotiated with each union separately.
Mr. Moderator, could I be permitted to
Yes.
answer that last comment? I thought there was going to be a question in there, but to answer that, the hires were made on January 7th. There was a retirement at the end of February. And the reason that was done, and it was not done at the chief's discretion, the chief asked for permission to do it, was because operationally we've been trying to play catch-up for years. And the FinCom actually admonished us for not filling positions that were approved. They asked us to fill them. We had viable candidates, so we filled them. We asked for permission, and we filled them. It was the best way to act operationally. I know that Ms. Camacho may not, want to deal with the day-to-day, but we have to. We can't run short on a regular basis, and that's what we were doing. All right, so we had an academy date coming up. We asked for permission to put that in anticipation of a retirement. We ran over for approximately 6 to 7 weeks, and we will be at full strength, because to put a police officer on the street is a hugely labor-intensive process. And I don't know, we can't just put an ad in the paper, hold interviews, and they're working. It's a process that takes over a year. We started this when you folks generously gave us this money last summer. And you won't see those officers on the street until July 7th. That's when they graduate. That's how long it takes. And that's why that was done.
Mr. Morton.
John Morton, Precinct 3. This is a much bigger issue than the police department. I have nothing but admiration and pride in our police department. It's gone from an embarrassment to a credit to this town and to the entire Commonwealth in 3 years. And it's due to the management and the patrolmen who every day work to make this a better town. But there's a very important issue here. First, I'm very confused by people who are saying that we have to fund these contracts. Of course we have to fund the contracts. Contracts are not delayed because they're not funded. Contracts have never been delayed because they're not funded. Contracts are delayed because people don't agree to the terms of the contract. And then when the contract's signed, it's necessary to fund it. And we can hold a special town meeting, although we've never had to do that, or we can draw the money from the reserve for collective bargaining that has historically been in the selectmen's budget. Now, what's the difference? I tell you, in my view, the difference is huge. If you put raises in the operating budgets of any department before the contract is signed and before we know what the raises are, those raises become part of the operating budget of that department. And the department head can move, we don't approve line items. I mean, we have this line item budget, but when we approve a budget, we approve the bottom line. And the moderator reads the bottom line, and we approve that bottom line. The department head then can, contrary to what a previous speaker has said, hire new people. Can spend money consistent with that bottom line. So you may think you're putting money in for salaries, but you're actually putting money into that department. And so a practice developed over the years, and I think it was a very good practice. It doesn't reflect badly on the departments. It doesn't discredit the police department. It doesn't discredit the fire department, but it says we're not going to fund the compensation accounts until they're settled. Instead, we're going to put some money in a selectmen's reserve for collective bargaining. And at the point where the contract is settled, if that's enough, it will be used for that purpose. If it's not enough, they have to come back to town meeting. Guess what? If the estimated raises that have been plugged into this budget aren't enough, they have to come back to town meeting. It doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference is that we are not being asked to approve a much higher budget for any department before we know what that money is actually going to be used for. I think the practice that has developed over the years of putting money into a reserve account for collective bargaining is a very, very wise way to go about doing this. I think that we need time and discussion between the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee to change that. I don't think it should be changed on the floor of town meeting. I don't think it should be changed after the Finance Committee was told that there would be no changes after May. I just think that that's not the way to go about this. So what I have heard, and I ask to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I would ask the previous speaker, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Mr. Hill, if we do not approve these line item compensation accounts before collective bargaining agreements are signed, can we not, at the end of the budget, simply reinstate the collective bargaining reserve in the selectmen's budget and go back to where we were and protect ourselves from squandering compensation raises for other things within any one of the departments where those raises have been included, but where we cannot monitor the actual application of those raises after we leave this room? That's my question.
Mr. Hill?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to Mr. Morton. I just had a sidebar conversation with the Board of Selectmen, the chair and the town manager, and the board of the Finance Committee. And last Thursday, we also asked the Finance Committee to vote me additional authority if we needed to make negotiations or to make adjustments on the budget on the fly here on town meeting floor without having to reconvene the entire Finance Committee. We know what money we had in the reserve and what we took out. We know net of the contracts that have been settled, and we'd be more than happy to make the motion in writing when this budget is completed to reopen the Selectmen's budget, their department, and refund the amounts that go into the Selectmen's reserve at this point.
Okay. And one last comment. I hope no one in this room believes that whichever choice we pick is going to delay the negotiation process for collective bargaining agreements. They will go on, they will be decided, and they will be funded. It's just a question of what process we choose to do that. I would support the Finance Committee's budget with no sense that in any way I'm slighting the police department or the fire department or any other department, and urge you to do the same.
Mr. Moderator, if I might just, just in response to the previous speaker, and we have had some talks with the finance chair and with the management team, and while the preference certainly would have been to have the money in the line items as we did, there are reasons that it's easier to handle that way, and there are other options that are available to us as far as if money could be appropriated through articles and so forth. But in speaking with the finance chair and the management team, if the Finance Committee would be willing to put the reserve back in play, we can certainly work with that. And just so, you know, and we would be willing to take the steps necessary by coming back in a special town meeting or whatever to appropriate those if in fact contracts could be reached. And I believe we'd be willing to do that. We are looking at the distinct possibility of a special fall town meeting anyway for various other things that have to be done in town. So if the Finance Committee is willing, and they do have the numbers, and we're willing to reinstate that, we can work with that. We'd be more than happy to do that. As we said the other night, you know, we're trying to be fair to everybody as well, and that everybody includes the 27,000 residents of the town. So I would urge you to defeat the motion on the floor, which would be to actually fund the selectmen's budget, go with the Finance Committee's budget, and we can deal with putting the reserve back in. That would give our team some leeway going forward to try and alleviate anybody's concerns about money being in play that could be spent without anything being appropriated. And this body would still have to appropriate the money to come out of the reserve to go out for the contracts. So you would still have the ability to exercise your privilege of approving the monies that are going to be spent, which is your privilege for this town. So I would ask you to defeat the motion that's on the floor and support the Finance Committee's motion, and we can deal with putting the reserves back in play.
Mr. Fitzgerald, since you made the motion.
Since I made the motion?
Yes.
They're going to agree to that? Money's going to be put back in? People can negotiate their contracts? I withdraw the motion.
The motion that Mr. Fitzgerald is withdrawing was to use the selectmen's budget amount of $5,418,743. I think there should be an appropriation for Fresnel lenses, which means by withdrawing that, we're now back to the original number, which was read. And if, Mr. Crimmins, you want to make any discussion on the whole budget, the original?
No, Mr. Moderator. Actually, based on the comments that have been made by the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, the Chairman of the Finance Committee, which goes to the point that I was going to raise, I'm satisfied that if in fact that commitment has been made, as we have heard it tonight, I agree with my distinguished colleague from Precinct 3 that the proper way to handle this is, as we have done for as long as I can remember being a town meeting member, which is to have the money in the selectmen's account for reserves for collective bargaining for all the reasons that have been previously stated. So without belaboring the point, Mr. Moderator, I concur with the previous speaker. Thank you.
And Mr. Moderator, just a point, just to make sure everybody heard it from the Finance Committee Chairman. The money that would be put in the reserves would be net the money that's already been put back in the budget for the two contracts that have been signed. I believe that was the statement that was made. I want to make sure everyone realizes when you see a little bit of a different number than what was in the reserve to begin with, it's because we did, the Finance Committee did appropriate the money specifically for the superior offices in the budget you are speaking of, and for the library contract that was signed, that money has already been in their handout from Monday evening. They had already adjusted the salary line item in the bottom line budget. So when you know, don't think that anybody's pulling a fast one, that when the number's different than what was there to begin with. I do believe the chair had indicated it was net the money that's already been appropriated. And there were actually 3 that were appropriated that way. So I thank you for your indulgence.
Mr. Lurie? No? Well, whichever wants to go first.
Thank you.
Sometimes you swap seats around, so. Okay. have
Peter
a
Murphy,
slugger.
Precinct 2. One of the questions I have and would like some clarification on is if this money gets put back into the selectmen's budget, there's going to be a bag of dollars put there. And if that bag of dollars does not get spent in the negotiation, does that now can the selectmen use that for other things?
No.
So it's dedicated to that.
Takes a town meeting to move it.
And once it is settled, any remaining dollars now goes back to the general fund, or does not get borrowed or whatever.
It would roll to free cash the next year. Is that right? Yeah. So if they settled contracts, for example, if we put back, the number's $311,000, if we put that all back and they settled contracts and $200,000 of that was needed, the remaining money would stay there through the rest of the year, would roll into free cash in the following year.
Thank you.
Mr. Lurie.
David Lurie, Precinct 6. I just have a couple of objections. It has to do more about the process that we saw. There was apparently some meetings that took place, and there was, from what I can tell, there was an ability to create a contract back in April, and somebody had stonewalled the process from making it available to FinCon. And I just don't understand how, I guess what I didn't hear during that whole discussion was where was that roadblock? What entity was stonewalling that information from becoming available if it's true that it was available? And that was one thing that I heard, and I never heard which entity was actually causing that to happen. And I think that transparency is probably a good idea. On another point, the fact that we don't see these contracts, there was never an opportunity for an open hearing that if there's a contract and there's no open hearing, how come on the floor today we're being asked to vote before actually being able to see the contract? Whereas if we had an opportunity for an open hearing, it would all be aired out and we'd at least have transparency into what's going on. So right now there's a lot of discussion back and forth, and we've got to digest all this information on the fly, and I just don't think it's fair to town meeting for us to have to go through that. So I guess what I'm trying to voice is just an objection to the process. Whether or not we're going to create this extra fund or not will be up to a vote, and maybe that's a great idea, maybe it isn't, but it's almost like we're hoping for the best on it, and I just don't think it's right that we should be going through that. So I just wanted to state my objection, Mr. Moderator, and that's all I have.
Any further comments? Now, at this time, we'll take one step at a time here, just so that we don't do three things wrong. We're back to the original dollar amount for the police budget, Department 30, account number 210, for $5,333,926, which is on the on this red, white, and blue sheet. And the red means that we're spending the money. On the vote, I'm going to take a voice vote first unless there's any problem. All those in favor of the amount recommended by the Finance Committee of $5,333,926, say aye. Aye. Opposed? I'll say it's unanimous.
Thank you very much to the town, thank you.
But I can't check off without debate. That's 9:14. Now, on the question that the note handed to me by the chairman of the Finance Committee.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
If I might, I did write a motion and give it to the moderator, and what I would suggest is that we proceed to the rest of the budget and adhere to our protocol, and at the end of the budget process, before we close and have final numbers, that we can entertain the motion to reopen the selectmen's budget to fund that reserve, if that works for everybody.
And I would go along with that, and I'm going to return this to you so that you can have it put in proper form and available, so, and have it ready. What we won't complete the, well, whatever. Don't anticipate anything in time-wise on this, the best you can. Department 31, account number 421, Department of Public Works.
$1,124,083.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Department 32, account number 422, Public Works Highway Department.
$245,615.
That's a change, right?
I'm sorry.
I have 355. Good going.
Oh, sorry. On the bottom of page 41, the number is $355,400.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Department 33, account number 423, Public Works Snow Removal.
That's $245,615.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Department 34, account number 424, Public Works Street Lighting.
$266,000.
Okay, Mr. Coleman.
Eric Coleman, Precinct 5, to the Public Works Commissioner. There's streetlight replacement, $70,000. Who is responsible for street lighting now? Are we repairing it ourselves, or we have it out on contract? What's going on?
It's on contract.
But so the $70,000 is contract for somebody else to replace it, replace streetlights?
That's not part of the regular streetlight program. This money is for lights that are in subdivisions that are 30 or 40 years old, that are on wooden posts that are falling down, or fiberglass posts that are broken. This is a start.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the amount of $266,000 for account number 424, Department 34, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Department 35, account number 650, Public Works, Property, Parks, and Trees.
$29,850.
Any discussion? Mr. Smith. Mr. Paul Smith, we have three Smiths here. What's that?
More than one Smith.
Oh, yes. There's more than one Hanson.
I have a question on line item 273. Why is there a 5 times increase on that?
Why is there an increase?
Yeah, 5 times. $273, machine rental.
It's a $3,000 increase. It's a rental of a crane. When we have to take trees down, I can't take them down with our equipment.
It's only a $3,000 increase on.
Yeah,
So there was a large increase last year, not this year?
Well, 2012.
Yeah, well, we had a hurricane.
I'm new here, so I need the help.
That tropical storm buried my budget.
Okay, that's where it came from.
So we're still trying to recoup. There's numerous trees that have been requested to take down that I can't afford to take down now.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Mr. Rock.
John Rock, Precinct 3. Just a quick question to the super. This particular department, does that cover the upkeep of the center of town?
As far as what, the plantings?
Yeah, maintaining the islands and the bushes there and flowers.
The flowers are done by volunteers. There's several groups that take care of all the flowers in the square. We maintain the trees. We do maintain the islands as far as keeping them clean if possible.
And watered.
And watered.
Okay, I just, you guys do a great job, right? But not so much in the middle of town. Those islands often look like ashtrays.
Absolutely, I agree.
It's a pet peeve of mine.
Mine too.
We got...
Any suggestions, I'd be willing to take them.
Well, maybe a little bit more resources put into it or more regular cleanings. So we got Plywood City down there, and we got kind of these, moth-eaten rose bushes and the flowers that are done by volunteers. And that's the image of the town. I mean, so many people pass through there every day. I just think, again, this is my own personal opinion, that more should be done. And it's not meant as a criticism, but that's the center of our town. And I don't think it would take a huge expenditure or effort to, get more flowers, get some big planters with, I'd like to see it spruced up a bit until we realize the master plan or whatever. Driving through there, sometimes I feel sad.
Mr. DeFelice.
Couldn't restrain myself when you started talking about plants. As John might know, a lot of cities and towns, and even the state, will have various islands and so forth cared for by companies, individual groups, clubs. And usually what happens is these, either an individual, a club, or a business will, it's called, we used to call it adopt an island, where these, one of these groups would adopt an island and would maintain it. They do it, I'm telling you. I've done it myself in other areas. So what happens is there's like an agreement between, say, the Public Works Department and a group. And that group would be responsible for perhaps putting flowers or a couple of plants and responsible for maintaining them. And in exchange, they usually give them like a little sign saying, island maintained by XYZ company. So a suggestion might be, and I don't know if John would be amenable to it, to think of maybe doing something like that. It's not too late to do it this year, but maybe certainly by next year. And some of the islands in the square could be done, any of the islands throughout the town. And that would help Mr. Rock, and we would put a smile on his face. So I just thought I'd throw that. John, you've seen that, right?
I have, and it works out very well. I know that Fitchburg does it on a regular basis. A lot of the larger towns have that on a regular basis, and they do a great job.
Right.
I do agree with Mr. Rock. My biggest problem in the square right now, I think, is cigarette smokers, because there's only 2 spots that we have problems with cigarette butts, and they're both at stoplights.
Yep.
So if we take out all the stoplights out of the square,
I'll vote for that.
Then I won't have any problem with cigarettes. The other problem we had was we were trying to put something in the middle of the islands to dress them up, and most of the time it was generally mulch, or at one point we had talked about using artificial turf. But those things burn. Again, cigarette butts. I've tried to buy a combination blower vacuum unit, a low horsepower, so that I could just suck up the cigarette butts, but unfortunately, the mulch came with it. So if we get them all to quit smoking in town and do away with all the lights, all of our problems will go away.
John, if you want to set up a committee, Mr. Rock and I will join your committee. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy. And that's a cut-off debate. All those in favor of cutting off debate, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. On the original amount of $1,004,000, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one, wow. I wrote on the book. I got ahead. See, that's one of the reasons why I read these things back. Department 35, account 650, Public Works, Property, Parks and Trees, $29,850. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Now, for Department 36, account number 433, Public Works, Sanitation.
$1,485,228.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Department 37, account number 541, Council on Aging.
$382,800.
Thank you all.
Hang on a second. $382,887.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Department 38, account number 615, Historical Commission.
$1,020.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Gotta flip a few pages here. Department 39, account number 610, Library. I believe there's a change.
There is. And again, if you refer to that memorandum that was distributed on Monday night, the library is listed in there with the agreed to contractual changes built in. And we have a new adjusted departmental total of $981,025.
Any discussion? Mr. Hill or anybody? If not, no.
The new number is $981,025.
And that's on your handout. It was handed out, big memorandum. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion is carried without debate. Department 40, account 692, Memorial Day.
$3,700.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Department 41, account 491, care of soldiers' graves.
$10,375.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Department 42, account number 630, recreation.
$193,032.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Department 43, account 543, Veterans.
$606,439.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Department 42, account number 542, Youth Commission.
$228,584. Right, Department 44.
Department 44, it
Youth
is
Commission, 542.
account 542, Youth Commission, 228, 584.
Correct, $228,584.
Okay. I heard a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Okay. Mr. Hill, on Department 45, account number 300-301, Education.
The total department is $40,399,147.
Mr. Moderator,
Ms. Rezzi.
Mr. Moderator, on behalf of the school committee, I'd like to make a motion to amend the number. And we would like to amend the appropriation of the school department accounts, numbers 300 and 301, to increase by $308,000 for a total new bottom line of $40,707,147. And to meet this appropriation, $245,000 be taken from the tax levy and $63,000 from free cash.
Do I hear a second? Now, there was a handout.
Half-page handout?
It's a half-page handout that looks like this. And, Mr. Moderator, we have prepared a very brief conversation because, first of all, the school department budget is a very large number. And also to discuss the reasons for the school committee's requests and how they reached this number and therefore are bringing it to you tonight. You have a handout of the presentation that you're about to see. For this presentation, I would like to thank Ms. Diane Dolan, who helped with it because she's extremely adept with these tools, so she's going to help me go through it. And we're going to be very brief. I'm going to touch on some of it fairly briefly so as not to spend too much of your time. But as your superintendent of schools, I believe that I would be derelict in my duty if I did not explain to you what we know the schools need and give you a sense of the state of the schools in this context. So that's why I wanted to go through this with you. So we're going to make it as short as possible. But there are some really exciting things going on, and there are some really exciting things that we'd like to do. When students leave this building after they've been through their 13 years of school, I want them to have the best possible opportunities that the world has to offer them. We want them to have the best job opportunities. We want them to have the best post-secondary opportunities. We want them to have the most fulfilling occupations. We want them to have the means to change the world if that's what they want to do. We would like our students to go into the world with no limits. So, what would it look like if we could move the district forward to a level of world-class education to compete with education anywhere? Well, there are certain things that would mean. This is not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to give you an idea. One of the things in the 21st century that everyone needs is proficiency in higher order thinking. In a global world, a high level of cultural competency and knowledge of the world, problem-solving skills, the capability to work effectively in teams, which is how so much important and creative work is done these days, the ability to express oneself both in writing and orally is extremely important, and if you go into a college recruiting office where they help students get jobs after college, the list of skills that are most required by businesses these days, the ability to communicate in writing and orally is at the top of the list. We also know that everyone needs to understand overall wellness and the skills to maintain it. We want our students to believe that the power of their own effort will help them to achieve any goal. And of course, technological and scientific literacy is extremely important. Now that we have access to the internet and everything that can bring to us, the ability to analyze and evaluate the vast amounts of information we have, that's actually a much more important skill to teach than a body of facts. It used to be you had to learn certain facts, and now there are too many facts to teach, and the skill is to try and figure out which ones are important and meaningful and true. Creativity, elements of good citizenship have always been an important part of public education. We want our students to have an enduring curiosity and a commitment to lifelong learning. The statistics are changing all the time, but most people these days have 5 careers before their working life is through, and most of them didn't anticipate anything except possibly the first of those. And we now know that a sophisticated ability to resolve conflict and a high level of social skills helps you to achieve more than just certain things on your resume. If there are 2 or 3 people competing for a job, the person who presents themselves the best and is able to look people in the eye and impress them and persuade them, that's the person that's going to get the job. So, if we wanted to provide all those things to our students, what would we need? Now, the list that you are looking at, and it's a considerably long list, and I'm not going to go through the details of all of it, and this is not what we're asking for. But if we wanted to give all those things to our students, we would have to increase our faculty in quite a number of areas. It isn't possible anymore to achieve everything for every student in the length of the school day that we have. We would have to do extended day. We would have to move more deeply into the field of green education, where so much of the new employment is going to be and the changes in the world. We need more wellness education. We would have to increase our art and language offerings. Technology becomes more and more important in all of our lives every day. Our technology department has been understaffed for years, and yet the amount of equipment that we have is growing all the time. So in order to keep it maintained and teach people how to use it and so on, those things would have to be increased. We'd need math and English and science coaches. Through the downturn, we've been able to keep our class size very reasonable, but we have not been able to keep that entire level of support that many districts have to help the teachers teach better in the classroom. Our students need tutoring, especially for specific tests and issues around MCAS. Our special ed department is somewhat understaffed. We have 120 children in the preschool and no early childhood coordinator. There are many things that if we wanted to really go to that level, we would have to fund. And over a period of time, years, we will hope to put back a lot of the things that we've lost in the last 5 to 10 years of cuts and to put things in place to move the district forward, because with education moving as fast as it is, if you're not moving forward, you're essentially moving backwards. So, if we were to fund all of these things, now, the first thing Diane's going to show you is our per pupil expenditure versus the state. We actually spend $1,600 less per student than the average in the state. So we spend less per student than the average district. The amounts of things that you've just seen, if we were to add all of those things, we'd still be below the average per pupil expenditure. But we believe that we could bring this district up to the level of a world-class, extremely highly functioning district. But we are not asking for that because this isn't the time and the money's not there. What that would look like if we were to spend that money, there's the areas we would spend, as you've just seen in your list, and the total cost. But we aren't asking for that. We are asking for an increase in our budget this year, which would amount for about that percentage of the things that would be necessary to make our offering truly world-class. And I don't want you to think that what we offer isn't good. We have a spectacular program of studies here at the high school. We have really fine teachers. There are many, many things that are in place that are truly superlative. But I'm trying to put this in a larger context because people often ask, well, why do you ask for money? And what we're looking at is a very small amount of money compared to what we would need to really go to this level that I'm talking about. Now, people often ask, well, how are we doing in relation to other districts? And a couple of years ago, Ms. Walsh made a point of saying, when we look at Stoughton, we shouldn't compare Stoughton necessarily to the immediately surrounding towns, but to towns that are like Stoughton. So the state puts together a chart, and it's called the DART. And yes, there are a lot of numbers on there, so we don't need to go through all of them. But the DART is a set of 10 districts the state considers Stoughton to be most like. So this is us with 10 other districts like us. So I'm just going to ask you to look at the bottom line there because, thank you. If we go to the next slide, we've taken that bottom line and enlarged it a little bit for you. So of these 11 districts, and I'm going to go from the top down, we're a little better than average in our English MCAS scores and our math MCAS scores. We actually have quite a distinction in science, and I'm extremely proud of all of the teachers who have been involved in that happening. It actually is something really quite remarkable. We're doing extremely well in growth as far as the movement over a period of a year, how our students do in English language arts. We're about average in math. So, about average, and yet we spend at a rate of 10th out of 11. So we're doing pretty well considering that we're spending less than the districts that we are most like. So in some cases you would say, well, this is good enough. But for us, good enough isn't good enough. And yet we understand we're recovering from an extremely, extremely deep recession that's completely unprecedented. And things can only happen at the speed that the funding is there. So we're going to try, we have a 3-year district improvement plan, we have a 3-year budget plan, we have a 5-year strategic plan. All of them are geared towards moving us in the right direction, even if not as fast as we all would wish. And there have been some changes in the district over the last 8 or so years. Now, most people know that students who have a lot of resources at home, come with a lot of readiness for academics, tend to do better on standardized tests and have an easier time in school. And there are things that make it more difficult for students to achieve. Poverty is one of them, and not being able to understand the language of instruction is another one. So over the last 8 years, you see our numbers of non-English speakers, English language learners, have gone up significantly. And our number of students that are poor have also gone up significantly. So it is a credit to our educators that with a relatively flat level of resources, we're actually able to do quite well with a growing number of students who are hard to teach. And we did a study in the Daw School a couple of years ago when we had some very capable interns from Stonehill College. And they were able to figure out that when a student moves in from a lower performing district than Stoughton, it takes us 2 school years to get them up to where a Stoughton student would be who came at kindergarten and went through our whole system. So we can do it, but it takes time, it takes effort, and with the resources we have now, it takes about 2 years for a student that comes from someplace lower performing to be able to perform as well as someone who was brought up here. So I've kind of given you an ideal where we might go, where we would like to go, and we understand that it's not something that we're going to be able to do immediately. So I'd like to explain the portion of that plan that we're actually asking for this year. Our main goals in this budget are to maintain the current level of services that we have. We want to not eliminate any extracurricular activities. We don't want to increase any fees. No one in public education ever really likes fees. We would like to replace some of the lost positions that we have lost over the last 4 years or so that have had the most impact on service that we've seen. And we would like to add some minimal improvements from our 3-year plans and our 5-year plan to move us forward into a more world-class level of education. And education being what it is, we have multiple state mandates which are or underfunded, which this budget also addresses. And this is a year when many, many, many things are being thrown at educators. So we've had to completely change our curriculum to the Common Core. There's a tremendous amount of work involved in that. We're doing well, but there's much, much to be done. We've got a brand new educator evaluation system that everyone's grappling with. Retail is a new approach to English language learning we're being forced to adopt in a very short order. New tests are taking over for MCAS. They're going to go away. The new PARCC tests are coming. We have the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. We have to spend money on transportation. This is also not funded, at least not yet. And we've had to enact some various trainings and curricula because of the anti-bullying legislation, so we've had to take staff off certain tasks to do that. So let me tell you how the budget breaks down. The request includes an increase of 4.87%, and most of that increase is contracted obligations. And then there's a small percentage of that increase for the mandates I just talked about. About 18% of that number is new positions and programs, so that's a small percentage of the entire increase. 10% is replacements for things that have been lost over the years, and then a small portion that's other things. And the way that looks, if you look at the list of things that are in the budget proposal, there's a short list of all of the positions in our, when we look at what we would need to move to the highest level of offering. The school committee, after consulting with the staff and me with all the principals and department heads and all the people who get a chance to weigh in on this, we have compiled this list as the things that are of most vital importance. And this is a very, very large organization. So we build in some contingencies, particularly in the area of special ed tuition, because things do happen, and so we want a little bit of flexibility to deal with things when they come up. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that have come up over the last couple of years, sometimes the governor is allowed to make cuts to balance the budget if the revenues don't meet expectations. In 2009, and Kathy can correct me if this was 2008, but there were 9C cuts, the governor's cuts, and the town had to come up with $300,000 for those. We have lots of leaves of absences, including maternities and long-term illnesses. We had an issue with snow a couple of years ago where the roofs had to be cleaned off. Roofs were collapsing all over the state. The McKinney-Vento transportation that I mentioned. The special education transportation number is always in flux, and we've had a few unanticipated out-of-district placements this year. And that's just some things I could point to indicate things that have happened already. But this year, we're facing a very large specter, which is the possibility of the federal sequester, and what is that going to do to the grants that we get from the federal government. So right now, we think we know what's coming, but the things that support Title I and the things that support special education are going to be cut if there's not some kind of a solution at the federal level to the sequestration, and frankly, none of us sees one of those that coming. So this is something that we're going to have to cope with this year, and we don't know what it will look like. And just because this is a big number, and I think maybe a lot of you were here a few years ago when Dory Frankel, among others, said to us, we asked for some curriculum and some instruments in borrowing articles. And she said, I'm going to recommend that you get these things this year, but I don't want to see them in borrowing articles anymore. So the school committee has been extremely parsimonious in the amount of money that they've asked to borrow over the last few years, and you'll see that reflected this year as well. And then we took a look at the long-term revenue trend, and as the revenues for the town have gone up in the last 10 years, you can see that the percentage of the school district budget in that larger number has remained flat, while the overall number has risen. And so what that's resulted in is a decrease in the overall percentage of the revenue that the school district has received. And we do as much as we can with as little as we can. We try and give you the very, very, very best value for money. And we will continue to do that. And of course, what the number ends up being is absolutely your decision. But over the last few years, and this of course has been true for everyone, we've been doing more with less. And this year, we're trying to make an attempt to begin to go at least to some small amount in the other direction. So thank you very much. I know your time is extremely valuable, and thank you for patiently listening.
Mr. Hill, do you want to make any comments because of the changes?
No, the Finance Committee had originally reduced the school budget by about $230,000, but since then, Southeast Regional came back and hit them with another $70,000 hit. So I think town meeting can find the money to fund this budget as they so choose, but we wouldn't argue against that.
And I will say that I certainly, in the 5 years or so I've been here, developed tremendous respect for the members of the FinCom. Some of them I've now known well and personally for a long time, and we certainly appreciate and respect their recommendation. Having said that, the school committee is taking a different approach to the Finance Committee this year. No hard feelings.
No, actually, what I will say is that there's pretty much anything that the Finance Committee, Subcommittee on Education has asked for has been supplied by the schools. They've been extremely transparent and have given us hundreds of pages of documentation. I think 150 questions have been fielded in writing. Is that correct? Or?
Well, that was the first round.
That was the first round. The follow-ups added a few more. So, so there's not really any places that we're seeing that you know, the school is not being pretty efficient in what they're doing. There are so many unknowns, which is the problem. I think they're trying to cover the bases on that. But again, just one out-of-district placement could send them over the cliff. We don't know what's going to happen with sequestration. So, so I don't. I wouldn't argue against this change.
Mr. Malley.
Thanks. John Malley, Precinct 7, Finance Committee. I'm just trying, you had $70,292 that possibly you're going to have to come up with for Southeast Regional. And the rest of the 308 is basically to put back the money we were recommending cutting?
Yes,
So,
Mr. Moderator, through you, Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker, that is correct.
All right. So, and I don't disagree that we need to put the 70,292 in there if that's what's going to be required by the state, our increase in our Southeast Regional thing. And I think, Mr. Rowe, you said that could be put directly into the Southeast Regional account, not in the budget in general, so that way it's geared just for that. So in case for some reason they don't surcharge us extra, that won't just be absorbed into the budget somewhere else.
There's two separate appropriations, as most of you know. There's the Regional School Department, Department 301, and then there's Stoughton Schools. So I suppose the motion we don't have the final assessment yet from Southeastern. So I suppose the motion could be for a total department of $308,000, but I would ask that the town meeting mention that the amount that would go into Department 301 would be the amount of the final assessment from Southeastern, and the difference would go into the Stoughton School Department, just so the amounts are finite and official. So.
Okay, so, because what I would recommend is that we obviously put that money in Department 301, so we have the money we need when we get assessed this money for Southeast Regional. But the balance of it is something that the subcommittee spent a lot of time and a lot of meetings and a lot of back and forth going through, and to whittle down what we felt was unnecessary at this point in time for the school budget. And we had made a recommendation to cut that amount of money based on the fact that we've gone through the budget line by line many times and with lots of discussion between the three of us and amongst all of us. But the three of us then sat down and went through a lot of discussions, came up with, actually there was a lot more areas that people were looking to cut maybe, but it ended up, we all agreed on this particular budget based on these cuts of 200 and, I think what the total was, 240 something thousand, about there. 238,000. And that number came up with based on basically reviewing everything. What we recommend to you, town meeting members, to approve based on what we've gone through for you on your behalf to analyze the budget and what we felt was unnecessary expenses that we shouldn't be putting in this year's budget anyway. And you can look, if you want to look online or go through what it is. We can't recommend specific, we recommend the cuts, but I mean, they could still take money, obviously, and fund that position that they wanted and get it from somewhere else. But our cuts are based on the positions we don't think should be funded, and if they want to still choose to fund them and not fund someplace else, they can obviously do that. But we cut those areas, and we didn't say these teachers that you want, social studies and math and English. It wasn't teachers. I mean, it was a community relations specialist, which is like a publicist for the schools. I don't really know that at this point in time we can afford to be hiring a publicist for the schools. It just didn't make sense to us at this point. Part of it was taking money that was fully funded by a grant and now started taking some of that money and putting it in the budget and using some of that grant money for something else, which is sort of a trend that seems to happen is you get a grant for a position, then you slowly put that position into the budget, and that way you can use the grant for something else, and then we sort of add a position over time. And I don't like that process, and I think we agreed on that. And a few different other areas which you can see, but this is the budget we came up with based on our analysis of everything we saw, all our discussions, and that's what we put forth to you guys is our budget. But I was obviously recommend that we have to put the 70,292 back in because we have that assessment, Southeast Regional, we have no choice. And if it can't be sequestered, aside, I shouldn't use sequester, but if it can't be put aside just for Southeast Regional in that 301 account somehow, then maybe we should put it in the FinCom reserve, and if we get that thing, then we can put it over. I don't know, however we do it. I just don't want that 70,000 to absorb in the budget somewhere else and then just used if we don't get assessed that amount. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Soares.
My name is Joe Soares, Precinct 2. The school budget has increased for the last 5 years by 5%. And as Dr. Rizzi quite honestly stated, we are in a recession for the last 5 years. When you are in a recession, one's common sense dictates that budgets should be reduced. 1/4 of the population of Stoughton are seniors who have not seen a 5% raise in approximately 5 years from Social Security. 9.6% of Stoughton's population are unemployed.
Town of Stoughton doesn't exist without the people of Stoughton. The town of Stoughton's job is to protect the people of Stoughton. The people who pay taxes in Stoughton, in my eyes, are the angels of mercy. School is supposed to train children to go out in the real world with the tools to survive. This includes tightening their budgets when money is tight. Taxes are the same for people who live in the town, whether they are working or not. Taxes have no conscience, but people that vote taxes do. That means us. Inflation is predicted to increase markedly. This includes homes, gasoline, food, and everyday expenses. Almost every state and town is going bankrupt through the mismanagement of money. They cannot supply the entitlements the people have paid, and the example would be Detroit, Michigan. Now, Mr. Moderator, please bear with me because I know there's a motion on the floor. If this motion on the floor doesn't pass, I would like to make a motion that the budget stay the same as 2013. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Mark Snyder, Precinct 2. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to whoever can answer this question, what is the municipal side total percent increase from last year?
Mr. Hill?
I don't know. I think it's in the same range, approximately 4.7%.
Okay. I got to find my piece of paper. Here it is. Okay. The 4.87% increase does not include this additional funding you're asking for?
It does.
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
That was the original proposed number. So the number that that I've proposed tonight in the amendment is the original number of the school committee's voted budget in December.
Okay, so as the previous, the FinCom chairman just said, it's about equal with the 4.87? Okay. Again, another question through you, Mr. Moderator, this time to the town accountant. How does the $245,000 from the town levy and the $63,000 from free cash affect, first of all, the free cash, how does that affect the motions that have already been recommended by the FinCom in terms of how much cash will be left over? And second of all, how does the $245,000 from tax levy, how does that affect taxpayers?
As far as the taxpayers, we budget for, the Finance Committee budgets for the full levy amount, the Proposition 2.5 levy limit. We may, once the final receipts come in for 2013, there may be room to not use the full 2.5 levy. In other words, leave some tax money on the table, so to speak. Like, for example, for the fiscal 13 budget, the Board of Assessors and Selectmen, when they set the tax recap, we did not use our maximum levy. I think we left behind like $260,000. So naturally, any vote that you take ultimately affects the taxpayer. I mean, you are the people that are setting what your taxes are going to be right now. So, but there may be room based upon revenues, since we do budget conservatively for revenues, there may be some leeway as to not tax to the full levy capacity, as we did this fiscal year. So, and the Board of Selectmen would make that decision in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
And the other question was
about the free cash.
About the free cash. We have not used any of our free cash as yet. So obviously, if we use the $60,000, it would make it unavailable for future not future, but subsequent articles.
The question I asked was, including the articles that have been approved by FinCom, how much cash is left over in free cash?
The Finance Committee has used up all 100% of the free cash with their recommendations.
Okay, so if this body approves this, then they'll have to cut it somewhere else.
We'd have to cut it somewhere else, correct?
Okay, thank you. All right. I've been a big proponent for the schools for 20 years, right here, including on the FinCom. And I support helping the schools as much as we can afford. I question if we can afford it. As far as world class, I am not sure how adding a community relations specialist, parent coordinators, parent liaisons, and behavior curriculum data makes a world-class school. Teachers make a world-class school. Technology, supplies, equipment, things that, and a good building, which I support. But I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Moderator, to the superintendent of schools, I know when my kids were here, and they got a great education, and I thank you for it, and all the teachers that they had. But the parent coordinators, when they were here, they were parent coordinators, they were parent volunteers. They were parent liaisons, they worked with the teachers. I know I did that in the elementary schools here. Could you explain what the need for all these things are? And if there was any way that you could do without some of these things so we could have some kind of a compromise motion here?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker. So there are two different things that you're talking about. The community relations specialist has come from many conversations that have taken place during the master planning process. And during the master planning process, there were focus groups, numerous, or more than one certainly, that were conversations about the schools. And I have pages of notes from the focus groups. Many of the things that people said, we'd like the schools to do this. We'd like the schools to provide this. We'd like the schools to be better in this or that way. When I saw all the notes, I was both elated and depressed because 70% of the things that people wanted the schools to be doing, we are already doing. I was elated. No one knows about them, so I was depressed. This is part of a large question, and I believe on Monday, Mr. Morton alluded to something I'm going to allude to now. The school system, you have to ask yourself, is good enough good enough? And we're looking at, every year, the Stoughton Town Meeting has been gracious enough and wise enough to give the school district what they need to keep going. But as you look into the future, you either go forward or you go backward. You don't stand still. So the question is, what kind of a community does Stoughton want to be? Do you want people to want to move here for your school system? Do you want to attract the kind of people who want to raise their families in a place where there are superlative schools? And if people don't know that there are superlative schools and what the things that are really spectacular that are going on in this town, if they don't know it, then in terms of attracting people, they might as well not exist. So that's the rationale behind that particular position. What we have noticed, and we certainly notice this as the population gets more poor over time, but I think that everybody would agree that it's true. As much as the teachers can do to bring students' achievement up, as much as they can move students forward, without the help of parents partnering with us, there's always going to be a limit of what we can do with those students. So the modest amount for the parent liaisons and coordinators, and this was modeled on a program that is done in many different districts, is to have people, and they're part-time people, and their hours are very limited, to reach out to parents, to bring them in, to teach them about the curriculum, to teach them how to read to their children, to teach them how to make a good environment for doing homework, and to make sure that parents know what the schools have available to them and what they can do with the schools. This is certainly nothing that interferes with or supplants the use of volunteers. We have volunteers in the school every single day, and we would take hundreds more if you would come.
My only fear...
You could sign up tomorrow, actually. So they really don't, one does not supplant the other. And we had gotten to the point where without the help and engagement of parents, we know that what we can do with the children is just always going to be limited by that much and could always be that much better.
Mr. Moderator, through you, I just want to raise, I just think this puts another level of separation between parents and the teachers and the principals, and there's already communications issues from what I've heard. So I think that might make it worse. The other thing is that, you know, complaining about the media not covering good things, I think we do a pretty good job, but of course, people don't like to read about good news. And if you send it and you have a full-time person, if you had not a part-time, but if you had a full-time person sending the media good news all day, it wouldn't get published. There's no, you know, some of it gets published, some of it won't. I mean, putting out a newsletter or something might be a good idea of the school system around the community, distributing it in stores and restaurants and letting people know what's going on. My only fear is, I think some of these things are great ideas, but I think that if we're going to be having to affect other budgets to do this, then I would like to see it, you know, decreased a little bit so that we don't have to take money out of free cash that we don't have right now. Thank you.
Ms. Bronston.
Denise Bronston, Precinct 8. I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry. Is a course at the high school world religion, correct?
Do we currently have a world religion course? Yes.
But it doesn't teach anything about Christianity, does it?
When a religious course, when a religion course is taught in a public school, it's historical and comparative, so there's no judgment made about a particular religion and no advocacy for a religion, but rather an examination of what different religions may teach or proclaim.
Yes, it covers Islam, it covers Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, but not Christianity. I don't know.
I actually would have to, since, and sometimes the program of studies changes, so I'm not personally aware of everything that's in every single class we teach, but I would certainly be happy to look that up. For you, I wouldn't be able to give you that information this evening, no.
Well, I did call the school several weeks ago, and I requested a book that was taught in this course, and I gave my name and number and never received a reply. I wanted to see the textbook itself. I had read about this course being taught in other schools, and so I wanted to find out what material are you using in this course at Stoughton High School. I inquired, I couldn't get a response. The other thing I wanted to ask about, the other gentleman covered a couple of things, but I know the U.S. Senate passed Education Day, and it's supposed to be celebrated in the schools. And it promotes the culture and the morals. I'm trying to find out.
I think...
This is where the budget is being spent on, these textbooks that are controlling the morals and destroying Christianity. All right? It has to do with, do we buy our books through the Texas system where most schools, you know, process their purchases? Or do we go someplace else before it destroys our culture here in the town? All right. All right. As to the liaisons, the way you have described the liaisons, the coordinators, it appears that they're parenting the parents. They're telling the parents how to be parents, what to read to their children, you know, how to play with their kids, how to spend time with their kids. Yes, we don't need these positions. We can save the budget by eliminating these 3 positions or several positions. I'll save my other questions for later. Thank you.
Mr. Lurie.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Lurie, Precinct 6. And to the moderator, to the superintendent, I also noticed that there's, throughout all the presentations and materials distributed, a lot of focus on world-class education. And at first I looked at it and I thought, well, that's a nice abstract concept that everybody would want to strive for, very positive kind of thing. Who wouldn't want to be a world-class community, right? Is it true that it is an abstract concept that we're striving for, or is world-class education an actual organization with its own motto, its own philosophy, its own structure, and its own precepts on how you should model your system?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker. World-class to me means the best. It means comparatively speaking, that which would be world-class. It's not a curriculum or an organization or anything other than a way to describe where we would go if we could have the best.
If that's the case, Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker, the superintendent, then that's a very noble way to position the way you want to strive for. I noticed if you go online and you do a search on world-class education, there's this organization that's trying to get countries that fell behind to copy and mirror the top countries in the world. Our country dropped from the top 5 50 years ago. We're now ranked at about 25. And these countries were able to leapfrog over us and drop us from the top 5 down to the 25th rank. And I don't understand how we're expected to leapfrog over those countries if all we're trying to do is catch up to them by spending money and at the same time falling behind at the same time by just trying to copy them. So how do you leapfrog ahead of them if they're setting the standard and we're trying to catch them? And the other thing that I wanted to understand is that over that same period of time, budgets have been going up and up and up. How can, if there's a correlation between spending more and dropping behind, then wouldn't it make sense that if you cut your budgets back, then your quality of education would improve? It doesn't seem on the face of it like that makes sense, but to me, I see a correlation. Spend more, drop behind, spend less, wouldn't we possibly get ahead through other ways of thinking about how we put together our budgets, the way we structure our curriculum, just like previous speakers talking about what are we doing with our culture and everything else. I do think those things are relevant, and I want to see our school system get ahead, not necessarily through money, but through excellence that we set the standard on. So if world-class education means just that, the abstract, great. I'm all for it. The other thing is that I'd also like to make a motion, Mr. Moderator, that we remove these extra positions from, at least the value of those positions, from the overall budget. Was there a motion already put in place, Mr. Moderator?
Well,
there's a motion on the table?
We have a motion. If you're looking to, do you have a dollar amount that you can?
I came up with about $300,000 when I added up those extra community relations specialists, parent coordinators, parent liaisons. I don't have an exact figure. That's the only thing I don't have.
Mr. Moderator, the point of our amendment was to replace $308,000 that the Finance Committee actually has recommended removing. So the number that you're talking about is the original Finance Committee recommendation, which the school committee is requesting to be amended. So that number there was a number voted by the FinCom, which was $238,000, and so that number is what we're asking to be amended. If I might, Mr. Moderator, through you, just say to the previous speaker, the term world class has no relationship whatsoever to any organization or particular philosophy. It is also the case that from 2002 to 2012, if you average the increase and decrease of the school district budget, the increase over time was only 1.98%. So the increase over 10 years has been quite modest. There have been some very significant cuts, and there have also been times when it's been a little higher, but that, in fact, is the average over 10 years.
Mrs. Anzavino. Please go to the mic or use one.
The number that the Finance Committee already has those positions that you want removed. Okay, so and there's a couple that we left in, that's why our number's a little bit lower than yours, because we actually liked them. Okay, but most of them were removed.
Okay, if they're already removed, then it defeats the purpose of another motion that I wanted to also make, which is that if there is extra money available from removing positions, that I wanted to see that if there was a capital budget fund, which I have, from what I understand, attending some of the FinCom meetings, that I'd like to see a fund available to be able to put in a new school, giant capital projects that are actually more in line with what the master plan was all about, even though there might have been a couple of chirps here and there of somebody saying, wait, wouldn't it be great if, wouldn't it be great if, wouldn't it be great? If you look at the preponderance of results out of these surveys, out of the most consensus that was coming out of master plan had more to do with capital budgets to improve the structure of the high school and maybe the West School in order to really draw in a lot of people to the community that would help our tax base and a lot of other benefits. So the master plan had much more to do with improving those major important things for the town, not so much the job here, the job there, to do these things kind of outside the focus of contributing towards a better education. That was a comment I wanted to add as well.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, if I may reply to the previous speaker. Yes. This budget that we're talking about right now is only the operating budget. In fact, the school committee has resubmitted this year statements of interest to do a replacement or major renovation of both the high school and the South Elementary School. We're waiting to see if the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, will team with us this year on those projects. So that was a big conversation in town meeting last year. Town meeting graciously voted the funding for the feasibility study for whichever of those buildings comes first. So these things are on parallel tracks. It's not an issue of one or the other.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mother.
Mr. Morton?
John Morton, Precinct 3. I'd like to call your attention to several things on this presentation and try to put them together in your mind. The chart that shows the percent of revenue of the town that's devoted to education shows an enormous reduction over the period of time covered by the chart. That's over about 12 years. The actual increase over the last 10 years has been about 1.9% per year over the last 10 years, which hardly keeps up with inflation. At the same time, you look at another chart here, the number of special needs students has increased enormously. The number of people who are not proficient in English has increased enormously. The number of low-income people who often need some special help because they don't have the resources at home has increased significantly. So we're talking about an educational system. Now look at another chart. that is 10th among comparable towns in terms of the amount it spends on students, per student. 10th out of 11. And we are worried about overspending for education. At the Community Preservation Committee, we held a community focus, and we had a very good turnout. And I would say there was a community focus meeting also under the very good leadership of Mr. Scardino as the head of the Stoughton Strategic Planning Group. And it was very clear at both of those meetings that after public safety, nobody wants to live in a war zone, after public safety, the key ingredient in bringing people to this town is the quality of education. It absolutely, bar none, is key to making this town a better town. We are engaged in a strategic planning effort right now. There is this sort of notion that you can't deal with abstracts. Well, let me tell you, the abstract that we are dealing with in strategic planning for the town is to make the town a better place to live. The abstract that we are dealing with in the school system is to make the school system a better place to educate our children. We have raised 2 sons from the time they could talk. We told them, you have to invest in yourself. You want to make yourself good, you want to make yourself valued, you want your opinion to be listened to, you want to understand the world. You have to invest in yourself when you're young. Invest in yourself by getting educated. Invest in yourself by working. Invest in yourself physically by exercising. And I have to say to the town, you want to be a good town? You have to invest in yourself. And how do you invest in yourself? Well, you maybe improve the bushes in the center. I 100% agree we should do that. It adds to the look of the town. You should improve the quality of people, not people, but businesses coming to the town. And how do you do that? You make the town a better place to live. One thing builds on another. The key ingredient to bringing people, when you sit down to decide, a young family with children, what town do I want to live in? The first question that comes up is the quality of education. The first question that comes up. And it's very hard for us to say we're very proud of the fact that we're 10th out of 11 schools in districts our size in terms of funding education. It's very hard for us to be proud of the fact that we've only increased our support to education at probably less than the inflation rate. I very, very much favor this kind of contribution to the school system. I think it's one of the key ingredients we can make in ourselves. I think it is essential to make this town the kind of town that when people sit down and say, where do I want to live? They say, hey, let's go look at Stoughton. It's got a good school system. It's got pride in itself. It's willing to invest in itself. So I hope you can see this as an essential investment in improving the quality of this town, the quality of life, the value of your properties, the value of living in this town, and support the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Perry.
John Perry, Precinct 3, please. To you, Mr. Moderator, to Dr. Rizzi. So we're looking at a total of 35 new positions that the schools are hoping to add with this budget?
I'm just going to read it from my chart.
Looks like 18 full-time and 17 part-time.
The first group on the list, down through library assistant, adds up to about 3 people, or would be 3 FTEs, I think.
I'm just reading from page 106 of our book here.
It's 8 or okay. You're reading a thing that's saying a step towards replacing that number of people. The number in the budget proposal is 8, and then some part-time positions that would add up to 1.5. About 5 total. The library assistant, for instance, is .375.
Okay. And just looking at your total proposed budget pie chart here, it looks like the replacement positions, if we take 10% of your budget, $4,070,714.
Actually, so the pie itself is only the increase, not the whole budget.
Okay.
So if you look at new positions, 18%, and replacement positions, 10%, that's 28% of the 4.8%. So it's
Okay.
actually a small portion of 5%, not the total budget. So that pie is not the total budget at all.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Also, I just wanted to point out, I didn't have a time to analyze the DART chart that you referenced, but I did take a pretty good look at an article on Boston Magazine of the top schools in the state, and I did notice that of the 50 top performing schools in this state, 20% of them spend less per capita on each student than we do. So I don't see a direct correlation on how much we spend per student to how our schools perform. I agree with some previous speakers that it is about the teachers and about the curriculum and how the teachers are taught, and not specifically about how much money we throw at the problem. So another question I had for you, I do see your amendment here, and
Mr. Moderator, if I
Yes.
might, if I could just take that point. The entire school budget, education is a very relationship-based activity. It's teachers, adults interacting with students. The amount that, when teachers come out of college and they look at the salary scale, they pick based on what they're going to get paid. So we need to be competitive. But of the entire budget, 80% of it is salaries. So the money goes into the teachers who are teaching the children. And there's about another 10% that's fixed costs like energy and things like that that we are just absolutely required to pay. So the things for buying curriculum and any kind of additional programs is only a very small percentage of the actual number. So the money spent is spent on people who do the teaching.
Okay. And referring to page 140 in our book here, we see that it's stated from your department that 91.9% of all students graduate for the graduation rates. And I'm just wondering, I came up with a figure of 85.8%. And again, that was referenced through the Department of Education. Again, Boston Magazine printed that in their most recent. So I'm just wondering, is it a big difference, 6%? So that's 6 out of every 100. Public education will tell you that that's pretty much 6% difference. So is the actual number 85.8% of students graduate from this school system, or is it actually 91.9?
I believe it's 91.9. We get the information. There's a very complex passing back and forth of information between the district and the state. So we have ways that we are required to report the numbers of things that students do, who they are, and so on, through SIMS data. We send them to the state, and then the state compiles the number. So I'm going to say Dr. Gray has a good number. I have not seen the article to which you're referring, but I have not gotten anything from it to put into any of these documents.
Okay, and one last question, and we'll move on. Again, your amendment references school department account 300 and 301. I've looked through your budget in the back of the warrant book here, and I'm just trying to find what departments are 300 and 301, so I can see where we're looking at the increase.
I think 301 is the Southeastern Regional, is it not?
Yeah, those are the things that
Okay.
are or education in total.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
If I may just address one point from a previous speaker, Mr. Moderator, through you.
You may.
Very briefly, and this is something we can be proud of as a state, when you look at the United States compared to all the countries in the world, there are many standards that other countries have a higher level of education or a better education by those standards. If you take Massachusetts and look at it as though it were a country, get rid of the rest of the 49, and compare Massachusetts to the rest of the world, then we are first, second, or third in every category that's measured. So there's a difference between looking at the United States and everyone else and Massachusetts against everyone else. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Anderson, Precinct 4. Just two questions through you, Mr. Moderator, to the superintendent. I was struck by the slide that said the number of limited English proficient students is increasing. Do you have by percentage what languages are coming in?
I don't. I know we have a lot of Portuguese speakers, Spanish speakers, Cape Verdean and Haitian Creole, and a smattering of many other languages. So there are some that are in small incidents or single incidents. I can certainly get you that information, probably even this evening, if you would like.
No, only that in your second chart piece you have the inclusion of in the high school level and middle school level teachers of Chinese. So are you getting an influx of Chinese in the town, or is this?
No, sir. This is not to. We have teachers who teach English to our non-English speakers. And then we have teachers who teach world languages to our English-speaking students. And over the last 3 years, we've added Chinese as a language offering in addition to Latin, French, and Spanish. And this is so students will have exposure to a language that is spoken by billions of people with whom we'll be doing commerce and so on in the future. So it isn't about English learning. And now that there are students who have taken 1 and 2 years of Chinese, we'd like to be able to make it a complete language that's offered to the same level as the others.
Thank you. The other one is the pie chart that we have on the proposed school budget, of which 62% of that budget is contractual teacher steps and raises and so on. We've had a lengthy discussion earlier about the town side of contracts and negotiations. My question to you is, will this body, or certainly through the Finance Committee, and realizing that it's a bottom line approval as it relates to the school department, will we see those contracts before we approve the budget? And also, where in your budget is the reserve for collective bargaining?
There will be, I'm quite sure, no contracts before the conclusion of town meeting. The contracts with the school department end later, mostly August 31st. So we do not anticipate that there will be any contracts during the period of town meeting. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. And the school committee has always had and of course by statute, and you reference, it is a bottom line budget. And if the school committee negotiates any increases for anyone, then it's going to be a matter of the school committee figuring out how to make that work.
So the answer to the question is there is no line item for reserve for collective bargaining in the school department?
Correct, and that in my, as far as I know, and certainly through my time here and through the time of my predecessor, that has never been the case. It's not the way the school district does it. It's rather a different process because it's a different board, and so there isn't, nor has there ever been.
But in the budget that you have presented, and that pie chart that you showed us is for this fiscal year coming up, of 62% for contracts and so on.
Well, and again, and I think that since this is the second question that's come up about this, I probably did not make this pie chart terribly clear. The pie is only the increase, and there are steps and increases already in the teacher contracts. So this is the percent of the proposed increase that would go to those things, and they're already negotiated.
Okay, I think I understand what you just said. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Barry Crimmins, Precinct 4. I am not personally a product of the Stoughton Public School System, but I am the proud father of 2 children who are current students of the Stoughton Public School System, specifically here at Stoughton High School. My daughter, who will be graduating in a couple of weeks, and my son, who is a sophomore here at Stoughton High School. Many of you, I know, are products of the Stoughton school system or have children who are, and several previous speakers have spoken of the quality of the education that the students receive in our schools, and I want to echo that sentiment. I also want to echo the sentiment of a previous speaker who, and I'll paraphrase, what price do we put on the education of our youth? I don't think we can put too high of a figure on that cost. We hear, and I'm sensitive to and can appreciate the concerns of adding to our budget, and we've heard concerns about folks on a fixed income. There is no investment that yields a higher rate of return, in my opinion, than the investment we make in our children, and specifically in their education. There is no investment, as a previous speaker mentioned, that is going to improve the quality of life in this town, as in any town, more so than the investment that we make in our children and in their education. This is one area where we have an opportunity to have a direct impact on the quality of that education. The teachers obviously have the most direct impact. We as parents obviously have an impact. But we need to provide them with the tools. We need to provide the school system and the schools with the tools to educate our children in the modern era that we are in. Keep in mind, as you all know, our kids typically, if they go from K through 12, are in the system for 13 years. As Dr. Rizzi has indicated, if we don't go forward, we don't stand still, we go backwards. It is not like running a company where you can say if we are in a recession, we can simply toe the line without any consequences. We cannot do that. You have to improve. You have to improve every year. Our kids, when they go out into the workforce, are going to be competing with all of the other school systems in not only Massachusetts, but throughout the country and, dare say, throughout the world. We must equip them with the tools that they need to be successful. If my math is correct, I believe the request by the superintendent amounts to less than 1% of their overall budget. Less than 1% is what's being asked for to be restored to that budget. We heard the other evening about departments that make money for the town. There is no department that makes more money for the town than the school department in the quality education that they give our children. And I'd ask you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, if I may, through you, I have just gotten from Dr. Gray the latest statistics that we have on graduation rates. And the DESE said for 2012, our rate was 91.3%. However, and I think this is something we can be very proud of, for students who spend all 4 of their years at Stoughton High School, as in don't come from someplace else, the rate is 93.9.
Mrs. Camacho.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roberta Camacho, Precinct 4. I was a member of the three-member subcommittee for education, and contrary to an opinion expressed previously this evening from a previous speaker, I found the process of discussing the budget with the school committee a rather arduous task. And one of the reasons for this was there seemed to be a lack of cooperation. We asked for a lot of documents. We certainly did. But some of those documents never were produced. There were some documents we asked for 2 and 3 times. They were not produced. We didn't learn about a 1.5% raise in contracts that was given to the teachers in the middle of this year, until about the second meeting. We had no idea of that. We didn't know that how much of the raises was already built into the budget. We weren't told that straight out until we asked about it. We weren't given a contract until we asked for it. I think it was the last night it was pushed across the table to us that we had the meetings. So I'm sorry that I can't be tremendously polite about this, but I have to tell you the truth. The budget was difficult to look at. As you see it in the book here, we were presented with the same kind of a budget that has the picture on the front of it. And on page 105, it has all positions added to the FY14 budget. Now, when we were going through the budget, if you'll notice, the community relations specialists, the parent coordinators, community liaisons, et cetera, the positions people have talked about previously. I'm not going to make comments about those. They've been comments made about them before, and that was part of the cuts that were made. But it was very difficult to understand the school committee budget, because the school committee budget, as it's set up in the document you have before you, did not match the general ledger. And without matching the general ledger exactly, when we looked at certain accounts in the GL, all of a sudden we were told, oh no, that's not how it works. We've combined these accounts. So what were we supposed to do? Separate them all out and figure it all out? It was a very, very difficult process. The GL was also not up to date. In one particular instance, the GL had not been, the encumbrances had not been made, and they had not been made for a year. The entire fiscal year, the monies had not been encumbered at the point that we had our first meeting. And the analysis that I did of the budget, my own personal analysis, I saw that there was probably around, and that's being not too stingy, probably about $700,000 that could have been cut from the budget, with no harm to direct education of the students. Let me give you an example of that. If you look at page number 117, on page 117, and then you compare that part of it to page 105. On page 117, under the section that says School Business Office, the third department down, 014, Administrative Salaries, Financial Coordinator. The Financial Coordinator is receiving a raise of over $10,000, or approximately $10,000. I think that's pretty generous. Instead of a 2.5% raise, which a lot of people in this town have settled for and would be very happy to get And in private industry, they would be more than happy to get in the dreaded private sector. This is a $10,000 raise. What's it for? Well, they're getting their school business administration certificate. We already have a person in the school department who has a school business administration certification. Why do we need another one? They may get it, but why the reward in that amount? 2.5% with a stipend for that, that's fine. But $10,000? And then, as we went through that same account, this is another example, under Secretary Clerical, all of a sudden, we see that the names, when we compared the budget to last year's budget, and we took a lot of time to do this, the titles of the positions have been changed. Well, if you change the title of a position and you change the amount of money, that means you are then managing to take a job away from someone. So what we found out was, after asking some questions about this, that oh yes indeedy, these jobs were being changed, and the people that were now currently in them would have to reapply. One person would probably be retiring, but the other person would have to meet the qualifications. A person who's been with the school system for a good number of years. But that was not listed on page 105 as new positions to be created. They were new positions and are new positions to be created. This is just an example of where your money's going. You cannot throw money at education. As previous speakers have said, you can't throw the money there. Most of that money is going to go for salaries. And there are many people on the steps in the Stoughton Public Schools, in the teaching salary steps, that are still at a bachelor's degree and earning 73 whatever plus thousands of dollars. No improvement in educational incentive over several years for some. I don't know what's wrong with that system. Talk about world-class education. That's where world-class education starts, with the quality of the educators. But the excuse is it's all about the children. We always hear that. But when you take a real good look at this, and if you had been at the Finance Committee, subcommittee discussions, they were not extremely beneficial. The other people on the subcommittee did not agree with me on everything. Obviously, we came to a compromise. And that's all right. I tend to be more hardline, and I tend to be more stingy than anyone else. But I worked in this school system for 38 years. So I think I know something about the internal workings of it. The $70,000 needs to be added because of the regional school district assessment. But as far as adding the other monies in that we compromised on our subcommittee to extract, and could have, I think, extracted more, I wouldn't do that. I am against this amendment, and I hope you will vote it down. Thank you.
Mr. Lyons? Mr. Coleman?
We have a line of people that want to speak, but the hour is getting late. Oh, you're
gonna... Mr. Lyons, go to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Frank Lyons. I'm new. Please bear with me. I'm going to talk fast. I'm tired too. I am a product of Stoughton Schools. My parents are a product of Stoughton Schools. My son will be attending Stoughton Schools in kindergarten come September, which is why I'm a rookie and I have come here. I would like to ask you, Dr. Rizzi, if the $300,000 goes through, how close will that bring us to the state average spending on students? Do you know?
It won't make much of an impact.
All right, all I have to say, all right, is that someone was very sad that the plantings in the center, all right, had cigarette butts on them. All right, I am very sad that we don't even want to be average, all right, in what we spend for our students. All right, less is less, folks. All right, you can say whatever you want, but less is less. And I'm done. Thank you.
Mrs. Lindwell.
Janice Esdale from Precinct 5. I have a lot to say about this topic, and the folks sitting here have also said that they have a lot to say. So I would like to make a motion that we continue this discussion at our next session.
In other words, you wish to have this on the table as we leave.
Yes, please.
I heard the motion to table. All those in favor of tabling to that, all those opposed? I'm going to say it's tabled because there's some little technicalities we got to clean up. So. That's a good idea. I need a motion to adjourn till next Wednesday. You talked to me 3 or 4 times. I even got your card. I got it. I have you. Yep. He's right there. Precinct 1 Chairman, please return your attendance. Precinct 7, please return your... I will make copies of that. I gotta retype it, because I copied it out of a book. To open. Okay. I just told him. He probably didn't listen to me.